So, last weekend, it was discovered that the developers of Digital Homicide is suing 100 Steam users for $18 million for leaving critical reviews on their games. You're probably thinking, wait, what? I know, it sounds insane, but let's start from the beginning for those of you who don't know what's going on and how this came to be. On Jim Sterling's personal YouTube account, he did something called Squirty Plays, later renamed Jimpressions, where he gave his first impressions of games. They're not full reviews. He did one of The Slaughtering Grounds by Digital Homicide. They in turn did a thing called Review the Reviewer, which was just text overlaid Jim's original video, criticizing him for not figuring out the game and coining the term Jim fucking Sterling son, who in turn did a review of the reviewer, essentially laughing at them. They retaliated with another video which was just text, and when Jim was laughing at them again, they decided to file a DMCA takedown of his video. For those who aren't sure what a DMCA takedown is, it's when a copyright holder flags content on the internet using their copyrighted works for copyright infringement. Basically torrent sites or people that upload music and movies. However, reviews, let's plays, and riffing on copyrighted content is considered fair use as it's for educational, transformative, or parody purposes, and therefore can be monetized without permission from the original copyright holder. But that doesn't stop copyright holders from abusing it to silence criticism. The video is back up 14 days later since Jim challenged it. If you challenge a DMC takedown and the party that filed it doesn't respond, the video goes back up. If they do respond to it, then it needs to go to court. And if you file a DMCA, you will actually have to agree to the reason of your filing is true. Otherwise, you'll be committing perjury, which is a criminal offense. That's why a lot of false DMCAs don't go to court. Ever since then, there's been this rivalry between Jim and Digital Homicide, to the point where Digital Homicide tried doxing Jim. They said that someone is going to sue him one day, but not them, regardless of them threatening litigation, and finally deciding to sue him for $10 million. But they apparently bumped it up to $15 million, according to Jim, saying that he caused damage to their brand and that he sent his fan base to harass them, even though Jim Sterling has repeatedly discouraged anyone from harassing them. Then they decided to sue 100 Steam users for a total of $18 million and subpoenaed Valve to release the names of those users, who are people that left mean comments on their Steam store pages. The next day, Valve pulled all Digital Homicide games from Steam, saying that they no longer wanted to do business with developers who were abusive to their customers. Valve will more than likely contest the subpoena though, because with Digital Homicide representing themselves, they would get access to that personal information of Steam users, and who knows what they would do with it. They may go about and start doxing those users. Digital Homicide are two brothers that develop their games in Unity, which is free to use, and they buy stock assets from the Unity store to use in their games, which explains why everything they make looks like a hodgepodge of artistic styles. The games are very low in quality, as evidence that they put approximately 20 games in about a year and a half, some games under the guise of other developers. All of this is because they couldn't take criticism of one of their games. If they had just accepted the criticism, of which I think Jim Sterling was rather reasonable with, and wasn't really that harsh, and some people like Sid Alpha, who went and played through Digital Homicide's library of games, said that Jim Sterling was far too nice. And the sad thing is, they're doing more damage to themselves than anyone else could do to them. If they had not said anything, looked at their games and thought that maybe they should have put more work into them, made their own assets, or at least used assets that match each other and made more quality games instead of throwing tantrums, then they wouldn't have dug themselves this deep into the hole that they're in. Could you imagine what would happen if any of the big time developers did the same thing? They would be made a laughingstock. When they make a bad game, they take the criticism into mind and try to improve for their next game. And when Digital Homicide did that, they made Dungeons of Cragmore. It was in early access and was given mixed reviews, and Jim Sterling said it wasn't that bad and he seemed to enjoy it. Because of their consistent antagonistic behavior to the gaming community, they caused so much damage to themselves that people would act negatively to them in return. They essentially were feeding the trolls. There's also accusations of them conducting some shady behavior with other small-time developers by offering Steam keys to people who vote on other developers' games or something like that. I don't know, and I'm not going to say much on that, but I'll just leave it at there's some accusations of backroom dealings going on. The odd thing I find here is that they're genuinely proud of their bad games, which explains why they would be taking it so personally, or they know they're creating shovelware in the hopes that their games are bought on impulse, and they've finally been called out on it, and are acting this way because they don't want to lose potential sales. The latter seems to be the more likely of the two theories, as they only went after Jim Sterling and not anyone else that reviewed their games because Jim had the largest audience that covered it. Other YouTubers that covered it were either small channels, or if they were large channels, they didn't speak English. And because they called out a big YouTuber, word got around a lot faster than it would if it was a small channel. Just like how when Total Biscuit was hit with a false DMCA takedown from day one Gary's Incidents developers. And because they were deleting comments and banning people from their Steam forums, they caused even more trouble from themselves. They denied doing this, but given their behavior and the evidence against them, which is if you file a false DMCA takedown and then say you're not deleting comments in response to criticism, it's going to be very hard to believe you, and I am of the opinion that yes, they were deleting comments and banning people to silence criticism against them. They tried to retain a lawyer to sue Jim Sterling, but that failed twice. I think, because people were making false pledges on GoFundMe that would cost them money due to chargebacks. But last I heard, they were representing themselves. If they did retain a lawyer, I wouldn't trust that lawyer at all. He or she may be taking the case, knowing that they'll lose or the case will get thrown out of court, but they'll still get paid in legal fees. If they're representing themselves, at least that's less legal fees that they'll have to dish out in the beginning. But when they lose, and I'm pretty sure that they are going to lose, they'll have to reimburse the defendant's attorney fees. The fact that they're asking for so much money in damages also shows that they can't be serious. They're trying to get a total of $33 million. Either they're trying to sue Jim and the 100 Steam users into bankruptcy through lawyer fees, or they really are insane and think that they're winning something for the little guys. I think they saw Lindsay Lohan suing Rockstar because she was accusing them of using her likeness for the character of Lacey Jones and that red bikini girl used in promotional work, even though the girl in the red bikini that's used in the promotional work is actually Shelby Willander, and she was hired by Rockstar for the promotional work. But we all know how that went. It got thrown out of court. I see the same result happening with Digital Homicide. They'll say that Jim Sterling's videos hurt their sales and his followers were harassing them. Jim will say that they made bad products and all he did was point it out. He can prove that he discourages harassment and he has no control over what his followers do anyway. But I see this as a legal battle that'll probably go on for a few years and then either be dismissed or result in Digital Homicide losing. But you know they'll appeal it to keep it going as long as they can. I've been very much trying to think of how Digital Homicide could win. They're challenging freedom of speech and expression here. This is going to challenge what's considered criticism and what's considered harassment. I don't see them winning against Jim Sterling, but they could win against the 100 Steam users, at least maybe some of them. Because if those users were leaving legitimate harassing comments, of which they wouldn't win $18 million, as that would be too much, but that's if Valve gives over the 100 Steam names and addresses, and that's if they don't contest the subpoena, of which I think they will, given the fact that Digital Homicide's behavior is too antagonistic towards Steam customers. This is just a really bizarre situation that's happened. A developer that got their feelings hurt and they're suing a game journalist over it. There's no little indie dev versus the big bad game critic. There's no battle to be had despite what Digital Homicide says. All this is about petty man children whose fifis got hurt when someone called their game what it was. They say some people never truly leave high school and Digital Homicide never left elementary school. This is childish behavior. And following the removal of their games, they're seeking legal representation against Valve. So they aren't suing Valve yet, but it looks like they're planning to. They're saying that because by removing their games, Valve is siding with its users and saying that it's okay for people to harass them. But the thing is, Steam is Valve's store. They can refuse doing business with anyone for any reason. They might not be able to sue Valve because Valve isn't responsible for what their users say, which is why a lot of social media sites allow users to block others and delete their comments. Because a lot of websites will tell you that if you are truly feeling threatened online, you need to go to the authorities and report their usernames, who will then in turn hand it over to their cybercrime division, like Rich of Review Tech USA. He has a stalker in the form of the RTU critic who is trying to get Rich to quit YouTube by attacking his livelihood. The guy actually contacted Rich's sponsors to try to get his sponsorships pulled. He's posted pictures of locations like the gym that Rich goes to, and has doxed him as well, I think. I'm not sure. Because the guy is overseas, Rich had to contact the authorities over there once he figured out who the guy was. That's a completely different situation from someone leaving comments of "your game sucks" and other types of mean comments. No one was actually going after Digital Homicide. I don't see this as ending well for Digital Homicide. They're representing themselves for one, which any court of law discourages. And in the case of Jim Sterling, they're challenging free speech and journalism. In the case of the 100 Steam users, they too are challenging free speech. Granted, some of the comments are probably going to be deemed as as legitimate harassment, but they're not going to get the millions of dollars that they're hoping to win. If they decide to sue Valve, then they would need a very expensive lawyer, of which you know they can't afford. But the thing is, Valve gives developers the ability to moderate their own forums and store pages, and therefore it would be their own responsibility to report threats of harassment to the proper authorities, absolving Valve of anything their customers do, and is probably in the terms of service developers have to agree to when they set up shop on Steam. And I'm pretty sure Valve isn't stupid enough to not include that clause in their TOS. However, Valve is probably the only party that Digital Homicide could sue, and sue successfully. Not because they pulled their products, but for exactly why they are seeking legal representation against Valve. While developers are given tools to moderate their stores, it's been criticized for being very lackluster, and due to Valve's hands-off approach for Steam, it's resulted in negligence. And because Digital Homicide was affected by Valve not doing anything, they could have a case against them. And the sad thing is, Digital Homicide kinda brought this all upon themselves. If they had ignored Jim Sterling and not reacted in the way that they did, it never would have escalated in the way that it did. It's the Streisand effect. They brought more attention to themselves by reacting negatively to Jim's criticism and keeping it going by their negative reactions. But the fact that they never did any introspection and considered that they should put more work into their games was probably their entire strategy, essentially becoming the Data Design Interactive of Steam. And if you don't remember Data Design Interactive, they are or were a shovelware maker for the Wii. I suggest checking out my Anubis 2 review to get an idea of what they're like. Digital Homicide, in essence, was doing the same thing, throwing up quickly made games onto a storefront at cheap prices in the hopes of making cash fast due to impulse buying. Keep in mind, they created 21 games in about 2 years, from October 31st, 2014 to September 2nd, 2016. That's about a month and a few days of working on their games. Their games are comprised of Unity assets either bought or acquired for free through the Unity store, allowing them to quickly cobble together games. But to make 21 games in 2 years? That shows a lack of care for quality. They're just taking the assets and making something that minimally functions and trying to sell it. I don't care if they are reusing assets, but at least make something fun out of them instead of just quickly throwing them together. I heard that Dungeons of Cragmore was their best work and they decided to take time and more effort into the game. Granted, I don't know how that came out, but it was a step in the right direction. I know that they'll probably come across this video. They seem to be the egotistical type that Google their own name, so I have a message for them. And I suggest really thinking about this too. Let it go. It's not worth all the stress you're putting yourself through. It's not worth all the stress you might and probably are putting your families through. Sometimes you either have to bite the bullet or roll the punches, whichever term you prefer. You really are digging yourselves into your own metaphorical graves. Instead of reacting in the negative ways that you have been, you could have just channeled all that time and energy into making a really good game. But you've continued to act negatively, irrationally, and continue to damage your own reputation at your own hands with your behavior, instead of moving on and proving your detractors wrong by making something great. Dean Doudril was one person, and it took him about 3 years to make Dust and Elysian Tale, which is the best game ever made. If you took the time and effort to make one game instead of flooding digital storefronts with shovelware to try and make quick money, you could have made one game and sell it for more than $1. You might even been able to sell it for $20 if you took the time and put forth effort in your games. Good games take time. Good games take effort and vision. It's good games that get you recognition, and it's good games that bring in the money. If you truly cared about your craft, you would have taken the time to make sure that your games were at least of passable quality. If you're going this far to sue people, it means one of two things. It means that you knew your games were shit and were just cranking out garbage and hoping to have a high turnover due to the amount of games. Or this was your plan from the start. Crank out crap, wait for shit to hit the fan so you could turn around and sue. However, if your goal was to crank out multiple games at a time so that way people would just sit on them and idle for the cards to sell, so that way you got a 10% cut of the sale because you were taking advantage of a flaw in the system, I will actually commend you on that. But it still doesn't explain your self-destructive actions and lawsuit-happy nature.